month at Noon Mountain, we will be here with a new presentation. During this presentation, you may come up with questions. If you do, please use the Q&A button on your screen to send in your question. Your question will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Now I would like to introduce you to today's presenter, Russ Bega. Russ began collecting U.S. coins when he was 8 years old after a trip to his local coin shop in northern Colorado. He was previously employed by Heritage Auction Galleries before departing on a decade-long career as a U.S. Army Infantry non-commissioned officer. In 2021, he joined the Harlan J. Burke team in Chicago. His specialty is Liberty-seated coins and 19th century numismatics. It's all yours, Russ.
All right, so let's see if I can get a handle on sharing this screen the right way. Okay, so after all of that, welcome to Gobrecht's Ladies. So real quick, we already kind of went over my history, but I'll give you it real quick again. I do work for Harlan J. Burke Limited. I'm a senior numismatist here. I run our downstairs storefront on 31 North Clark. It is a little busy today, so if you hear some background noises, I do apologize, but we are an operating coin shop. Again, I specialize in early US counterfeit detection, and I do a lot of exonumia. I'm a writer, I'm a researcher, occasional YouTuber. I have my bachelor's from Midwestern State University, which is a small school in Texas. I'm finishing my MBA from Purdue right now, hopefully December 2025. And like already mentioned, I'm a 13-year Army veteran. So this is going to be kind of what to expect from this. This is a huge, huge topic. It's one I'm very passionate about. And to be really honest, this entire talk could take hours. We could sit here and talk for absolute hours. So the basic agenda is we're going to talk about Liberty herself and her personification, because that's really what, Liberty seated is. We'll have a very brief history of Christian Gobrecht, the man. We'll have a general history of Liberty seated coinage. Really, I wanted to dive into kind of an overview of each series and kind of explain the series because they're not very well talked about. So we're going to do that. We'll talk a little bit about collecting strategies. And what I really want everybody to kind of get is this is a primer. This is not a definitive work. This is not going to tell you everything there is to know about Liberty-seated coins, because even as someone that considers themselves somewhat of a specialist in the area, I don't know everything. There's so much to learn with this. What's wonderful is there's a lot of really good people that know about Liberty-seated and are experts in it that I'm going to talk about. And I'm going to mention kind of throughout. So before we go any further, I really want to give a special thanks to the Liberty-seated Collectors Club. If you don't know, the Gobrecht Journal is one of the premier journals in the hobby. It's done by members and it's tremendous. And so much of this information comes from their back archives. I've read so many Gobrecht journals in my life. I have so many that they're tremendous, and that's where a lot of this sourcing comes from. So always keep that in mind as well. So real quick, I will talk about my own obsession for Liberty-seated coins. My obsession started when I was about 10 years old. I had kind of played with a couple of series and wasn't really sure what I liked. And then there was Liberty-seated. It was an 1857 half dollar that was cleaned within a half inch of its life, but it had, like XF details. And I fell in love with the design. And from there, I just kept collecting. I just kept finding new ways to really get into Liberty-seated. I started with quarters really in earnest. And then as you'll find out through this presentation, I realized that collecting quarters is difficult and it's something that I could never complete. So in my adult life, I have pivoted to a typeset of Liberty-seated coins. And I'm just fascinated by Liberty-seated coinage. And this is one that if you know me personally, which I saw a few of you in the audience will definitely know me personally, you may have already seen this coin. It's one of my personal coins. It's a really neat 1861 half dollar. It's kind of the crown jewel of my collection currently. So that is where I come from with what I like to call my seated obsession. I have such an obsession for this series. On this arm, I do have Liberty-seated tattooed on my body. So when I say I'm a rabid fan, I am a little bit of a rabid fan. So let's talk about Liberty and let's talk about her personified. So Liberty means a lot of different things to a lot of different cultures. So when we're talking about Liberty, especially in the first couple of slides here, I may not be talking about the American idea of liberty, but this is how it evolved. So, first we're going to talk about, and I do apologize for my pronunciation. I work for, the foremost ancient experts, but I am not an ancient expert. I know a little bit. So Eleutheria in ancient Greece was actually synonymous with the goddess Artemis and was worshipped primarily in Myra and Lycia. And this is kind of the first real personification of a liberty figure. The Greeks were very liberty-minded. You hear freedom, you hear liberty pretty frequently, especially when we're talking about things like, the Persian Wars and things like that. So this is kind of the first Western, and that's really what we're focusing on here, is the Western idea of liberty and her personification. The Romans, like they do, take most Greek things and adopt them. So libertas is a concept and a goddess. So we're talking about the goddess, the Roman personification of liberty. This became very politicized in the late Republic. You hear a lot of, Caesar and all these kind of guys that are going against the Republic, essentially. It's interesting. It's kind of outside of the scope of this, but to kind of give you an idea of where we start getting liberty even on coinage. So she sometimes also appeared on coins from the imperial period, such as Galba. He had a whole series, essentially, Freedom of the People. Coins during his short reign after the death of Nero. She's usually portrayed with two accoutrements, the spear and the Phrygian cap, which he holds out on the spear. If you actually look at the image on the left, that is just her holding the spear, and she's actually wearing the cap. But interestingly, and this is just, again, this is a primer work if you find, liberty and libertas interesting, but the Roman was established simultaneously with the creation of libertas and is associated with the overthrow of the Tarquins, which were the 5 kings of Rome before. And interestingly enough, it was kind of the personal god of the clan Junii, which is Brutus, the man who helped kill Caesar as a liberator. So this very much directly influenced the American personification of liberty. I told you guys just now that she, in Roman times, you would see her spear and cap. And if you look at the gorgeous Libertas Americana medal on the right, you will see that there is indeed a cap and a pole. So that's where the liberty personification really starts, is, Greece and Rome. And then now we have to kind of talk about those trappings of liberty, what liberty is generally associated with. So we talked about the liberty cap. So this is where it gets a little interesting. So you have the pilus and the Phrygian cap. Phrygian cap is a misnomer. You will hear it used, called a Phrygian cap a lot, but a true liberty cap was not a liberty cap. It was a pilus. If you actually, the top image is actually a Dacian prisoner in Roman captivity, and he is wearing a true Phrygian cap. This man is a slave now, so he would not wear this cap as a sign of his freedom. On the bottom, you will see a true pilus. This is Greek Attic pottery from probably about 500 BC, 400 BC, and it's very conical. It's not the same, but you play a game of historical telephone, and the Phrygian cap becomes synonymous with liberty. So I'm going to give you a real quick quote here. So among the Romans, the cap of felt was the emblem of liberty. When a slave obtained his freedom, he had his head shaved and wore, instead of his hair, an undyed pilus. So this is from Diodorus, who's a really good ancient source, who, if you've studied any ancient history, you know that you read his sources a lot. So that's one of the trappings of liberty, is the cap. Now, it evolved into the Phrygian cap, but really it is a pilus. The other thing we have to talk about is the liberty pole. Allegedly, the liberty pole was used as a symbol by the liberators. Essentially, the story goes that after the liberators had assassinated Caesar, they placed a pilus on a large pole, and as they were running through the city announcing that we have killed Caesar, they were using this as their symbol of, we are the liberators, we have saved the Roman people, we have freed you. Here is all of our liberty caps, essentially. This then becomes a very popular symbol during the Enlightenment. The image on the right is actually taken from a painting, a German painting around 1790, when you're getting a lot of upheaval. And you can see that the people are literally dancing around a liberty pole and cap. So where the poll comes from is, I'm going to say that this is also a Theodosius quote. The master brought his slave before the magistrate, stated the grounds of the intended manumission. The lictor of the magistrates laid a rod on the head of the slave, accompanied with certain formal words in which he declared that he was a free man. So essentially, that's where this liberty poll is coming from. It was used to free slaves, and during the Enlightenment, what we're talking about a lot is the freedom, our Western idea of freedom. So they adopted it as their symbol. So really, we had to talk about all of those trappings because we think of liberty as a very uniquely American kind of a thing. And now we have to talk about who is the real Miss Liberty, because all of these images, not a single one of them are liberty. And they're all seated. So you have Britannia, which if you look on the top left and bottom right, you have the image of Britannia. Britannia has been around as a national, essentially, god since the Romans. Roman coins actually featured them, in 122 AD. But Britannia is the national symbol and is the national symbol of English rights. So you have Britannia, you have Marianne, France, 1775, 1792. She is also shown literally with a liberty cap and pole, seated in very much the same style as our own liberty seated coins. And I mean, we just can't ignore the elephant in the room that the Britannia of that 1797 cartwheel 2p looks kind of familiar. It's got a shield, it's got a pole of some sort, it's seated. I definitely think we can make a case that there was some influence there. So now that we've gone through a couple thousand years of history about liberty and all those things, we now get to start talking a little bit more about what we're here for, which is actually liberty-seated coinage. So this talk is called Gobrecht's Ladies, and I have to tell you, that's actually a bit of a misnomer, but we're going to talk about Gobrecht real quick. So he's born in 1785 in Hanover, PA, and he began engraving as an apprentice to a clockmaker. He was also a pretty prolific inventor and tinkerer. He was a polymath at his time. He was employed by a premier engraver in 1816 in Philadelphia. Apparently, he seems to have been a pretty prolific drawer as a child. His mother and father were of German extraction. There's not a lot, not a terrible lot known about them. His mother was her family came over on the Mayflower, so he's very American, that's for sure. And his father apparently was a pretty hard-nosed academic and priest. So I think that, that probably influenced a whole lot of his life. His early mint work is pretty impressive. 1823, he's offered a position of assistant director of the mint. In 1824, he becomes the outside contractor to supply punches to the mint. So he's kind of double dipping a little bit here. In 1824, he's assigned as an engraving work for early proof coins, which is pretty neat. That means that they really trusted him to do these dies because they have to be perfect. In 1826, there's records that he may have designed or possibly seen a pattern coin all the way through, but there's not a lot of information on that. It's kind of, early mint records aren't super great all the time. Willie Kness has a stroke, and Gobrecht takes over his work, but he's not officially named the chief engraver until 1840. Then he is given the job as chief engraver of the U.S. Mint. So some of his early work is actually pretty interesting. So you have a mint medal on the left and you have a private medal on the right. So Charles Carroll was the last living signer of the Declaration of Independence at this time. And interestingly enough, the only Roman Catholic to sign the document. And you have Charles Wilson Peel, who was also another founding father. And he was, Gobrecht was contracted to do this work for the mint, for outside interests, that kind of thing. And it's very good work. It's very good medallic work. Pardon me. So this is his early work, but now we have to talk about liberty-seated coinage itself. So the design appears on pattern coinage as early as 1836, and it's adopted for use on the half dime and dime in 1837, quarters in 1838, half dollars in 1839, dollars in 1840, and modified for the short-lived 20-cent piece in 1875. Several modifications of the design, including removing Liberty's drapery, and there are a whole lot of rarities and even a few unique pieces in all of Liberty's seated coinage, which is, again, what makes it so darn fascinating. So first thing I want to talk about is Gobrecht dollars. So the Gobrecht dollar is kind of what we call them. Dollar production stopped in 1804. Coins were really dated 1803. You obviously have the 1804, silver dollars, King of Siam set, that kind of thing. For our purposes, silver dollars really actually do stop in 1803. Robert Patterson, who's the fourth mint director, was the driving force behind the design. He directed the current chief engraver to provide rough sketches of Liberty seated in 1835. Two other artists, Tom Soley and Titan Peel, ended up refining the design. And this is where it gets kind of interesting, because when I was growing up in the hobby, Gobrecht dollars were considered patterns and not necessarily regular issues. Some people still consider them patterns rather, but most people now really do consider them regular issues because they were struck in large quantities. Where it gets confusing is you also have pieces that are considered patterns in this whole part. So when I tell you that we could be here all day, we could be here all day and really get into the weeds. But let's look at the sketches real quick for Liberty seated. So you have 3 different sketches. And again, you have Peel's sketch, you have, all these other guys' sketch, but this is the design that is really nailed down. And it is basically the same design. The third design, you see her sitting on a chair, kind of reclining as opposed to the rock, but you really do get the essence. It's very much still the same. Now, what gets interesting is we apparently have a little bit of presidential meddling involved. Shocking, I know. So Andrew Jackson, who was president from 1829 to 1837, apparently took a pretty keen interest in the design. This is a direct quote. This is from Elvira Stefanovli. She's the former executive director of the National Numismatic Collection. It is inconceivable that the president was only involved at the final stage given his interest in the dollar project. We know that design material for the reverse eagle was being passed up the chain of command on an ongoing basis, so the same must have been true for the obverse of the Liberty seated design. In a letter of April 14, 1836, Patterson wrote to Secretary Woodbury, "Your suggestion that the mouth of the flying eagle should be closed had also made by us to the artist." So again, all of a sudden we have some weird stuff going on. The obverse was approved on January 14th, 1836 by Jackson, and Patterson was apparently not terribly happy. In his correspondence, he says, "The left arm is too prominent, requiring it to be thrown back and subdued. The left shoulder was too low and too far from the neck. The right arm was too much in the position of pointing. Too much confusion of drapery near the left breast and near the right hand. Knees were too lumpy, their articulation not being shown with sufficient distinctness." So again, we see some really weird stuff, right? We see a whole lot of redesigns and things like that. But it looks like Jackson took a pretty keen interest in the design itself, and they were even corresponding back and forth, and Patterson had to do some redesigns. So, but what's really interesting is that, again, Patterson isn't the one executing the dies. It's actually Gobrecht. But he's the one that gets the credit for it, but he's not really all that involved in the rest of the design process. He absolutely executed the design, but he wasn't really so much involved in the actual process, it sounds like. So here's an 1836 Gobrecht dollar. This is from our archives. And there's a really big elephant in the room that we have to talk about, and you can't see it great. Hopefully my mouse will work and you guys can actually see what I'm pointing at. But down here on the rock, you actually have the name Gobrecht. And prior to 1836, no designer or engraver's initials had ever appeared on a US coin, let alone their entire surname. So this is kind of a big deal, and it's very prominent when you see them. It says Gobrecht, and it says it large. It's not like VDB on a 1909 S VDB penny, where if you're not paying attention, you won't see it. This thing pops out and smacks you in the face. So this is 1836. This is one of the Gobrecht dollars. And then by 1838, the name is absolutely gone. It is no longer on the rock. So the name was removed in 1837, and it never appeared on any Liberty seated coinage again, not even his initials, no designer initials, nothing. So the only thing that changed at this time was the presidential regime. Speculations that Andrew Jackson himself insisted on the artist's name appearing on the coin. He is, if you know anything about Jackson, he was very hands-on, especially with fiscal policy. So it's not entirely out of the question that he, wanted to credit the artist with this. But by 1837, they're gone. 1838, we never see him again. So I like to call this dollars three. So you have three distinct designs of the Liberty-seated dollar. You have the 1836 pattern, which if you notice the reverse is very much like the Flying Eagle cent. It was used for the Flying Eagle cent. But you see a couple different design variations between 1837 and 1838. In 1837, you have this lovely cameo, this is actually my personal favorite design of Liberty seated. There's no stars, there's no legend. It's just Liberty in all her glory, and it's almost this cameo effect. It's gorgeous. It's my favorite. I think it's absolutely striking. On the 1838 issue, you will see that stars have been added, but they've been taken away from the reverse. So again, they're patterns, they're in circulation. You can find 1836, Gobrecht dollars. There was a VG10 that was offered to me very recently. So they absolutely were used in commerce, but they are, for all intents and purposes, they are kind of patterns. Most people never would have seen them. So that's kind of where we get there. And so now here is an introduction to Liberty seated coins. This is going to be we're going to go into the series, but first I want to kind of prime you guys because I'm so used to these terms that I don't think about them. So I thought we should definitely talk about this. And I have a couple diagrams for you. So when I'm talking drapery and no drapery, I'm referring to the drapery under Liberty's left arm. And we saw in that correspondence that they were talking about that while this design was being worked on. Arrows are found on minor coinage, dime through half dollar, and this denotes weight changes in the 1850s and the 1870s. Arrows / rays is a 1-year type for quarters and half dollars. I'll show you a good example of that as well. And then we have no motto and motto. In God We Trust was added to all coinage in 1866. So before that, you had no mottos. You also have a couple examples. 1866 half dollars come in two varieties. Motto, so they have the motto, and no motto, where they don't have the motto. So it is important. It is an important distinction. So basically, here are your terms real quick. If you look on the left, you'll see an 1840 seated quarter. This is actually an 1840 O. So the reverse design is not that quarter dollar, very obviously. But you'll see that there is no drapery at her arm. It is not there, and you will see it in the next image when I show you with drapery. That is the motto position for the half dollar and quarter and dollar. It is in a ribbon, in God We Trust. It is on the reverse of the coin. So drapery, you'll see on the 1853 where that arrow is pointing, you'll see the drapery. On some coins, it's more pronounced. On others, it's not. A lot of times what would happen is you would lose a lot of that drapery to polishing the dies and things like that. So even during the time that drapery had already been added to the design, you'll occasionally find coins that will have a variety of it has no drapery. And sometimes that is because of different die use and things like that. There are your arrows there at the date. In 1853, this was to denote the weight had gone down. In 1873, it's to denote the weight had gone back up. In 1853, it was 1-year type. On halves and quarters, you will see the rays. So you have rays around the eagle. These didn't really strike up that great, and they kind of realized it wasn't a great idea. So it's a 1-year type, and then it's gone. So now we actually get to start talking about the series itself. So we're going to start with half dimes. Half dimes were produced 1837 to 1873. So it's a very long-lived design, as all of these designs pretty much are. They were struck at Philadelphia, New Orleans, and San Francisco only. You have New Orleans, San Francisco only. You have 5 different varieties with this one. So you have no stars, you have no drapery, you have stars on the obverse, you have arrows at date, and legend on the obverse. So again, 5 subtypes to collect in this. which is pretty neat. You get a bunch of different things. The real big showstopper date here is 1870s. There is one of them known, and that's a whole story for a different day. But essentially, these are fairly affordable. The 1838 O has a mintage of 70,000 pieces. PCGS estimates survival in all grades of about 200 pieces. And on 122, a good 4 coin brought at auction, $204. So even the harder coins are fairly affordable in this. A really good example of this is 1846 is tough. It has a mintage of like 30,000 or so. And PCGS estimates about 250 examples extant. And a VG8 at Stacks 323 brought $1,260. So that's a pretty rare coin that's pretty reasonable and pretty much in everybody's budget that they could get to. What I decided to do with some of these is I wanted to see what it would cost to put together a set. So PCGS price guide for mint mark and major varieties in fine 12, you could probably put this set together for between $16,000 and $18,000 for a complete set of half dimes. It would take a lot of work and a lot of patience, but it's actually affordable to do. For most people, spread out over time. It's something that can actually be completed. Yes, you won't have an 1870s, but there's only one of them that exists anyway. I really like half dimes. They're incredibly small. They're a great place to start for any collector, but they're fun. They're super, super fun, and you find all kinds of different neat stuff with them. So dimes produced 1837 all the way to 1891. This is a really, really long-lived series. They were struck at Philadelphia, New Orleans, San Francisco, and very importantly, Carson City. Here you have 6 different varieties. No stars, no drapery, stars of verse, arrows, legend of verse, arrows, again. 1873 CC, no arrows, is going to be your showstopper. It's unique. But this is a fun series that people actually have a chance at getting close to completing. You can get many examples here under $100. Carson City dates can get tough. 1874 CC in Fair 2 brought $8,700. So that's one of your key dates that's going to be hard to finish. But again, under 10 grand for one of the major coins in most series is pretty good, especially a series as long-lived as this one. Civil War dates are also pretty tough. Civil War dates for most coinage are pretty tough because obviously there was a little bit of a kerfuffle going on and the mint was not producing near as much. So PCGS price guide for a complete date, complete set, date, and mint mark in good for is about $42,000. So again, we're stepping up, but it's still attainable for people. You don't have to be, one of these billionaire guys to put an entire set together. Again, it would be incredibly difficult to do, but you could. Double dimes or 20-cent pieces. This is a terribly interesting piece of this series, produced 1875 to 1878. And of course, 1877 and 78 are proof issues only. They're struck at Philadelphia, San Francisco, and Carson City. These are not designed by the same people that were designing Liberty-seated coinage all the way back in the 1830s. This is designed and executed by William Barber, but he kept much of the motif. You will see a little bit of difference. So Liberty is generally in the same position. She's still on a rock, all those things. The face is a little bit different. And if you notice on the shield, Liberty is actually very different. It is not a sunken relief. It is actually up, it is very high up on the coin. Obviously, the back is completely different eagle, different everything. Interestingly, about 20-cent pieces, there's no reeds, and they're darn near the same size, 22 millimeters versus 24.3 to the quarters. So these were not really well received. They were struck to, ostensibly, they were supposed to provide more change out west where specie was very, not flowing at the time, and to use up silver from the recently discovered Comstock lode. This was really, I don't want to say the word scam, but it was definitely, there were some Congress critters that were involved and some special interests to try to get these things made, which is why they only lasted a couple years. They're not terribly expensive. There are some absolutely very expensive dates in here. Carson City dates, the proof dates, of course. But to get an example in fine, you could do it for under $150. So this is a very easy part of the series. There's only one design variety. Mintages are about, mintages can be very low, but you can get, 1875S is kind of the one everybody gets, and you can get one for under $150 pretty easily. So they're expensive for a type coin, I suppose you could say, but a heck of a lot less than you would think, especially for only being essentially a 4-year type. Quarters are fun, and quarters are scary. So produced 1839 to 1891, which again, that's a really long-lived series, very long-lived. And so you're going to get the full breadth and width of mints again: Philadelphia, New Orleans, San Francisco, and Carson City. You're again going to have 6 different varieties: no drapery, no motto, arrows and rays, arrows with motto, and arrows again. So interestingly about quarters, in 1879 to 1889, they have extremely, extremely low mintages. The mints were really fired up about making silver dollars. The Morgan had just been introduced in 1878, and that really became the focus of the mints. Was not the small change, the 50 cents and quarters, it was dollar production. They were very focused on dollar production. And so from 1879 to 1889, and this is with quarters and halves, you'll find mintages as low as 5,000 to 15,000 pieces. Very, very small mintages. So they get tough, but they're not impossible. You will pay up for them, and you'll mostly find them in uncirculated grades. But they're out there. They exist. But it's a very interesting piece of that history. And then 1890 to 1891, they ramped production back up. And then, of course, they changed the design in 1891. There are some real showstopper dates in this one. 1870 cc, 1871 cc, 1873 cc, no arrows with 5 known. But this is a super, super fun series to collect, and it's very challenging. But for the average collector, circulated examples can be had for well under $100. Early dates are tough and always in demand for type collectors. The guy that's building a true type set, a true US type set, has to have all the same ones that guys that collect Liberty Seeded that exclusively collect Liberty Seeded coins have to have. So what you often find is that the type coins, the 1-year types, become much more expensive compared to the rest because more people need them. I decided to do a little playing with the PCGS price guide and all that kind of thing. If you want a complete mint mark set with all the major varieties, it can be had for around $540,000 in very fine condition. I say that, PCGS says that. My guess it would probably be closer to the $750,000 mark because there's a couple coins in there that you're going to have to convince somebody to sell you in the first place. So again, it's doable if you got a lot of money, but we are now starting to get priced out of the average collector to complete a set. Half dollars. Half dollars are super fun. Everybody loves them. And again, they were produced 1839 to 1891. Struck in all the same mints. This one has 6 different varieties. Again, we're talking 1879 to 1889, extremely low mintages. These, that should be 10,000 pieces, if you'll excuse me, that typo there, but this one is even lower, 4,200 at its lowest, 10,000 at its highest. Showstopper dates, 1853 O with no arrows has a mintage of 4, so good luck. 1878 S, there's less than 50 known. And then if you want to get really squirrely, you have to add the Confederate strike to that whole story, which is a story I'll tell briefly here in a second. So there's a lot of tough dates and halves. I know a lot of guys that attempt to collect them. The Liberty Seeded Collectors Club has a Seeded Liberty sub club for $50 that you have to basically have an application in. It's for the real diehard guys because this is a really diehard series. So to back up real quick to talk about the Confederate strike, essentially in 1861, you had the Civil War kick off in January with the secession of the states. And in January of 1861, Louisiana seceded from the Union, but they did not join the Confederacy until several months later. So it's interesting that in 1861, New Orleans $50, you have a chance. Any 1861 O $50 you buy is either going to be produced by the U.S. government, by the government of the sovereign state of Louisiana, or by the Confederate government. So that's a whole other niche collecting series. And the Confederate States of America did, in fact, produce a $50 with the Liberty seated design and a unique reverse design, which is your lower image on this slide. There were 4 known. There's, you can't buy them. You could consider them part of the set. Some people do. I don't know if it's really worth considering it because it is technically struck by a different government, but it's interesting and it's out there. The variety of 1861 O seated half that everybody wants is the one that was mated with this reverse die. There's a die crack running from Liberty's nose up to the rim, and that die was used in pair with this Confederate die. So it's considered a Confederate issue, and it is very, very pricey. Let's see. Let me look at my notes real quick. So again, many tough dates here, but examples of all major varieties can be found for under about $200 in decent circulated condition, with the exception of the 1-year no drapery type, which is 1839. A VG10 recently brought $570. So again, it's expensive for the average collector, but it's still doable. Yes, $600 for a coin for a lot of us is a lot of money. But when you only need maybe one of them to build yourself a typeset of Liberty seated, it's not such a big ask. One of my favorite things in Liberty seated coins that I like to tell people, I love cherry picking. I love, seeing something other people don't. So I always tell people, keep an eye out for 1840 Liberty seated $50 because they can be sometimes cherry picked, because essentially what happened in 1840, the New Orleans Mint, a mint worker, took an old reverse die that was used for bust coinage and mated it with the obverse die of the 1840 new Liberty seated design. Well, the problem is there's no mint mark on the back of that. So the only way you can tell is by the size of the letters. If it's a quote medium letters, it's actually a die from the earlier bust coinage. So it says 1840. You would normally look at it and just say it's an 1840 half because there's no mint mark, but it was actually minted New Orleans. Commands a very large premium. Most dealers will know this, but I have caught 1 or 2 in some people's inventory that they didn't realize that this was a sub variety. So I always like to kind of harp on that because it's fun, and it's going to play in later when I talk about, tips for actually collecting this stuff. So dollars are fun. 1836 to 1873, again, a very long career. 1836 through 1839, are we considering them patterns? I kind of do. Struck at Philadelphia, New Orleans, San Francisco, and Carson City. You only have 2 types with this, which is great. You have no motto and motto. And then, of course, you do have the Gobrecht dollars if you consider them part of the regular series of coinage. There's a lot of showstopper dates here. 1836 through 1839, all Gobrecht dollars are tough. I recently had one in VG10-ish offered to me for around $11,000. And that was a little expensive, but not out of the realm of possibilities. 1851, 52, 58, 1870s with 13 known. Most Carson City dates are going to cost you just a crazy amount of money. So in my notes, I have, this is, basically seated dollars are really interesting because the mintages are minuscule. The highest mintage ever in this series is 1.1 million coins. Many have, mintages below 250,000 pieces. And most of these really didn't circulate in the US. Dollars didn't super circulate a lot. A lot of these actually went as proto trade dollars to the Far East. What you'll find with these is 1860 O's are the common coin, which is the obverse on the left. 1860 O's are what you're going to find most of if you're looking for an uncirculated example. And most of those actually come out of a bank hoard from Arkansas. The apocryphal story goes essentially that in the 1960s, they were doing a giveaway at this bank, and the bank manager ordered 2 bags of dollars from the treasury to give out with, to give out as a promotional item for if someone was opening an account or whatever the program was. And he saw a teller slide a brilliant uncirculated 1860 O seated Liberty dollar over to a customer that was opening an account or whatever. And he said, "What are those?" And the teller says, "These are the dollars that you ordered." So by that time, they had already paid out a couple hundred of them, but he was smart enough to pull that bag. And so that is kind of where they exist. Liberty seated dollars are a tough series because you often find that they've been adulterated in some way. A lot of them have been cleaned. A lot of them don't. What I kind of say is face up nice. They come very baggy. They come with issues. So finding nice seated dollars is a really, really hard thing to do. And again, I say that because we're going to talk about collecting strategies here in a second, and it's kind of important. So this is an interesting one. I have to put it on here because it is considered part of the series by a lot of people. Even in Liberty seated collectors, trade dollars. So they were produced 1873 to 1885. 79 through 85 are proofs only. Minted at Philadelphia, San Francisco, and Carson City. Not designed by Gobrecht, but rather William Barber, like the 20-cent piece. And these were not intended to circulate in the US. And the legal tender status was confusing for a while. Showstopper dates for this are 1884 and 1885, where there's 10 and 5 of them known. They're proof issues only anyway. So if you look at the left image, that is one that I actually recently sold out of the shop, and it is chop marked to death. A chop mark is basically an acceptance mark by a merchant in the Far East. They would stamp it, and then it would get, further in circulation. And it was just a stamp that this is good silver. This is a good coin. You should accept this. You find these in not just China, but I have a friend that actually can read some chop marks. Found ones as far away as Burma, Japan, Thailand. So this is a very common practice in the Orient. For a long time, the grading companies and a lot of collectors in general did not like chop mark trade dollars, but they've become a lot more popular as people have realized they're actually a part of the life cycle of the coin. That means that they did what they were meant to do. So we talked about how they had this kind of weird legal tender status. So basically, they were legal tender from 1874 to 1876, and then they lost that status. They weigh a little bit heavier than a standard silver dollar. In 1887, the law authorizing the trade dollar was repealed, and the Treasury decided that they would accept all trade dollars that were not mutilated at face value. So then after that, they hold no legal status as legal tender, but they're terribly interesting. So he kept the Liberty seated kind of motif, but if you look, it's kind of almost more Britannic-like. You have the olive sprig for peace, and what Liberty is actually sitting on instead of a rock, she's actually sitting on basically commercial goods of the US. You'll see the wheat. She's sitting on a cotton bale, what our chief exports were at this time. So now that we have gone blisteringly through this entire series of coins, let's take a second and let's talk about collecting them. So there's a bunch of different ways to collect, right? You have date and mint mark. Ouch. As we talked earlier, there's really only 2 of these series that's feasible to collect to completion. And that is going to take many, many hours and many thousands of dollars to do. You have the other way, you have typesets, and that can be one of a few typesets. So personally, I'm working on a typeset of all Liberty seated coinage. So I need every single one, and I need every single subtype, but it's a whole lot more manageable than something like an entire Liberty seated half-dollar collection. I like all types. There's not one that speaks to me more than the others. If I had to pick a favorite, it would probably be quarters, but that's just my own nostalgia. So that's why I like typesets. You can also do just one, a denomination typeset. You can do a year typeset. There's so many different ways to collect that way. You have varieties. So you have WB numbers, which are for half dollars, which are much if you're familiar with like VAMs. It's the same thing. You have Briggs numbers for quarters. You have all the different ones. I put this image of this 1841 quarter on here because it's actually a really, really interesting variety. It's a double die obverse. It's probably pretty hard to see on your screen, but if you ever get a wild hair, go to the PCGS website and find the 1841 Liberty seated quarter, and you'll see that there is a double die obverse that's terribly interesting, and that's one of them. That actually is sitting on my desk right now. I was even unaware that this was a variety because I don't specialize in varieties generally, unless they're a couple, special ones. So that was something I learned myself, even just the other day, because I never think about it. And then, of course, you have how you're going to collect these coins. Slabbed, are they raw? Are they in albums? How are they organized? There's so many ways that you can do it. Me personally, all of my coins, I have one preference for grading company and all that kind of stuff. But I also have a fun set. So I have a Dansko album for Liberty Seated $50 that I call my no stress fun set. I'm not, waiting. I'm not trying to find the perfect coin. I'm not stressing about it like I do my regular set, because that's the passion project to me. My raw set of $50 is just fun. If I see one I like, I'll throw it in. I have some in there that are damaged, that have holes in them, that have graffiti in them. I don't care. They're neat to me. So what I'm really trying to tell you is collect what you like and how you like. There's no wrong way to collect. This can be a very academic hobby, and a lot of times there is that feeling that you're not collecting right. Well, these guys, they write fancy articles and they do it like this and that and the other thing. It doesn't matter. Collect what you like and collect how you like. One thing I really want to point out with this whole thing is Liberty seeded coins are often really only considered type coins by a lot of collectors. But I want to give you a real quick comparison. So you can get coins that are so much more rare than these 20th century rarities for a fraction of the price, which is one of the reasons I love Liberty seeded coins. So an 1846 Liberty seeded dime has a mintage of 31,300 pieces. PCGS estimates 500 examples still exist. In February of 23, Stacks sold a PCGS rated VG10 for $840. The 1916 D Mercury dime has a mintage of 264,000 with PCGS estimates 10,000 extant. And on 9/23, a VG10 sold for $2,200. So a coin that has, just a astronomically higher mintage, astronomically more survivors, goes for far less than a rarity like that. So that's what I think is so super cool about Liberty Seated, is that most people don't collect it by, that way. They collect it in different ways. So if you want a rare coin, it's going to take you time to find one, but you might be able to afford a lot more rare coin than you thought you could. So my parting here is, these are your tips, right? Patience. When I say patience, patience is the key for anything Liberty Seated. Research, all of that stuff comes into it. This is not something you go out and collect overnight. You're not going to go and drop 40 grand at your dealer and say, build me a set. It just doesn't work that way. You're going to have to be patient with the coins. You're going to see a lot of bleh before you see really nice stuff. And the problem with that is some guys, and I'll admit that I've been guilty of this myself, you see a coin you need, you buy the first thing you see. With Liberty Seated, that's tough. So I really, really advocate patience. Research is super important. We've all heard buy the book before you buy the coin. You need to do the same thing with this, especially. There is a lot of nuance in Liberty Seated, and you can get yourself in trouble if you don't do the research and know what you're actually looking at. The next two are really connected. Connections and community. Connections and community in Liberty Seated are a really, really big deal. You can connect with a lot of really prominent dealers by joining the Liberty Seated Collectors Club and just walking to their table and say, hey, I read that article, or I saw that in, that Gobrecht journal. And I'll tell you, being a dealer and knowing a lot of these other dealers, they'll absolutely speak to you. They will absolutely give you your knowledge if you're respectful and you ask about it, which is why the Liberty Seated Collectors Club is something that I always push so hard. It is all driven by members. I've submitted articles. Other people, other everyday people submit articles every single issue. And not only, just fluff articles, I'm talking real hard articles for the specialist. So the Liberty Seated Collectors Club is tremendous, a lot of great people. And it's something, if you really have a passion for this, or it's something you're interested in, the dues aren't expensive. You should absolutely take advantage and go check them out. And the next and final point is you have to have fun with this. You know, again, it's a serious hobby. I understand. I make my living doing it. But so many people get into this box of seriousness with this. And I told my daughter this the other day. No one has ever said on a plane, my goodness, this is a coin emergency. Is there a numismatist aboard? Right? If this is turning into a job for you, you're either a dealer, and that's a good thing, or you're doing it wrong. Collecting should never feel like a job. Have fun with this and learn more, because there is so much more to learn with this topic. Like I said, this is a primer, and that is all I have for you guys. So thank you so much. And I will turn this back over to Paula.
Thank you so much, Russ. If you have questions, go ahead and pop them in the Q&A, and I'll read them out for Russ to answer. I did see somebody raise their hand. If you'll just make sure to pop, if you had a question, put it in that Q&A. Is it liberty seated or seated liberty?
So the nomenclature is interesting. I have always said seated liberty, but most will tell you it is liberty seated. I don't really think there's that much of a difference. I think it's splitting hairs at that point. For years, I said seated liberty. I've started to try to be a little bit better and say liberty seated for the sake of quote unquote accuracy, but I really think it's 6-1.
Is it a unique or mistake? The name of Gobrecht's name, I'm sorry, in the coin minted in 1836. Are you following that?
I think it's no. So it was, yeah. So it was supposed to be on there. It was definitely put on there on purpose. It wasn't a mistake that it was put on there. Nobody really knows why. Like I said, it had never really been done before. Nobody signed their work at the early mint, so it's kind of very much a mystery of why it was there in the first place.
Okay. Oh, okay. Let's see. Which denomination is your favorite in proof, and do you recommend collecting proof versions?
Okay, yeah. So my favorite in proof would probably be a bigger coin, probably a half or a dollar, because you get all of that design. It's very bold, it's very striking. I don't not recommend collecting proofs, but it can be a little bit of a nut roll. Proofs are a lot harder sometimes, but they can be more affordable at the same time, which is kind of weird. Collecting proofs is hard, but it's something that's very doable. It depends on what your budget is, obviously, and it depends how much you want to get in the weeds with it, because there's their own research to go with it. But proofs are very attainable, so it's not a bad strategy.
Okay. Can you explain again about typesets? I'm interested in starting some sets.
Yeah, absolutely. So a typeset is exactly what it sounds like. You're collecting you're collecting a type. Generally, a typeset in the past had always been referred to as like a complete typeset, which would be an example of one of every US coin that has ever been produced. What I am doing in my typeset is I am doing one of every variety of every denomination of liberty seated coins to have been produced. So I'll need the 5 half dimes, the 6 dimes, the quarters, the halves, the dollars. I'll need an example of every variety of those. That's a typeset. That's what I'm considering my typeset of liberty seated. But a typeset for liberty seated could be as simple as I just want one of every denomination, half dime through dollar. I don't even care what subtype it is. I just want half dime through dollar. So typesets are really anything you want, as long as it kind of fits in that box of it's the same type.
Yeah. Okay. Why is there such a variety in mint mark size?
Prior to the 1980s, mint marks were actually hand punched in all the dies. So a lot of times, and you'll see this with Morgans and other things, Barber Coinage especially, basically a mint employee just grabbed the wrong size stamp to stamp the mint mark in. You'll see even in liberty seated, you'll see huge O, you'll see micro, things like that. And that's just because it's a mint worker grabbing a different, punch for the die. And also just quality control issues. You have to think that, especially in the 1850s, 1840s, it's going to be, they didn't have the same technology machining. So things had to be done in one-offs, so they can get it pretty good, but it's never always going to be the same.
I am new to collecting and first started collecting barbers and find that they have been in circulation so long, they are hard to find in good condition. Is this the same for Liberty Seated?
Yes, and at the same time, no. Barber coinage was used very, very hard, and that is something you very much see with barber coinage. You see, about goods to like very goods, and then it kind of drops off. What you have to worry more about with Liberty Seated is a lot of times you'll find Liberty Seated coinage with great detail, but at some point it's been what I like to call adulterated. It has been cleaned, it has been polished. There is something that has happened to it. So that's more the worry with Liberty Seated. But you generally do find them pretty heavily circulated. But I would say, honestly, I generally see stuff anywhere from good to XF every single day come over the counter.
What is your favorite overdate or repunched mint mark on a Liberty Seated coin?
Ooh, I don't know that I have a favorite. I'm not a big variety guy. There's some interesting ones. I really think my current favorite variety at all is this 1841 O double die obverse that I just myself got to really learn about. I don't do a lot of varieties. Really, the only varieties I really do are Confederate and Louisiana and U.S. issue on the half dollars. Obviously there's a couple you have to pay attention to, but I don't know that I have a favorite, but I might try to consider one now.
Well, were the mint marks the only thing that was hand stamped?
No, depends on time frame we're talking about, and this gets into the weeds of how things were done. Generally, at this time period, the devices, so essentially, Liberty is done, but the stars sometimes had to be hand punched. Depending, again, this goes into the weeds of the early U.S. Mint and things like that. So the answer is yes and no, depending on when, where, and how.
Lots of things to think about.
Yes.
In 19th century America, were coins used for propaganda purposes, or were they in a sense to keep the public informed?
Interesting. I would say both. I think coins are always tools of propaganda to some extent. Propaganda may be kind of a not great word for it.
Yeah, it makes it seem negative.
Yeah, because it kind of has a negative connotation. But let's talk about In God We Trust. In God We Trust came on to coinage because of the Civil War, because we saw a very much resurgence of religion, and especially Judeo-Christian religion here, and people turning to God, turning to the Almighty Providence, things like that. And so in 1866, after the Civil War, they had been experimenting. They knew they were going to put some reference to God on these coins as early as really 1864 with the 2-cent piece. And then even before that, you have the motto "In God, God Our Trust" is played with on pattern coins. So I certainly think that is a piece of, I don't know that I would call it propaganda, but it's definitely our national symbol. It's all those things. And it's our ideals. We put our ideals on coins. And at this time, liberty was the ideal. That's what people were, really worried about. So.
Okay. I don't want to take too much of your time because we are at the hour, but there's about 4 more questions. Are you okay with that?
No, let's go.
Okay. Is the definition detail of a Liberty Seated coin reverses talons a valid grade criterion, or is this merely a function of strike?
Ooh, that's interesting. Again, we have to talk about a couple things. So prior to 1836, we're using screw presses. But we're using steam presses after that. So this is something I've never actually really thought about. I would say it's probably a valid grading criteria in the same way that the hair on a Morgan is a valid grading criteria. There's nuance there, right? We've all seen, if you've ever collected Morgan dollars, you've seen uncirculated New Orleans coins with weak strikes that have loss of that hair definition detail, but they're uncirculated. And if you don't know the difference between strike weakness and actual rub, it can be an issue. So it's actually a question I've never considered, but now I'm going to consider it. to be real honest. And I'm going to have to, I owe you an answer for sure.
What's the best error you've seen on a seated coin?
The best error. I've seen a couple broad strokes. I've seen a couple off centers. I don't know that I've ever seen anything that really made me stop and say, wow. But I'm also not a huge error guy. Errors are interesting, but they're not really the focus of my personal collecting, or even my personal dealing. I have a guy that is very, very good at errors, and I let him handle most of those because, you know, they're kind of out of my wheelhouse. But I would love to see a double struck coin, you know, especially like a $50. That would be really cool.
Anything special to look for with a half dime and dime? They're so small, it's hard to see the detail. I'm a beginner, a 19th century type, doing a 19th century type set.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I would say as a general rule, you always need to look and make sure that, you know, if you're buying it to put it in your collection, you know, buy the best coin you can. And with half dimes and dimes, they kind of aren't as bad as the bigger coins with the cleaning issue, because they were never really collected as much. Quarters, halves, dollars, those were very much collected for a very long time. Dimes and half dimes have always not necessarily been overlooked, but been much more for the specialist. I will tell you that the Liberty Seated Collectors Club has a bunch of free resources on half dimes and dimes. And there's some really interesting varieties. One of the half dimes I owned for my type set at one point was a coin that the die had completely shattered. There was a die crack that ran from rim to rim through the devices. And there's another one that's a later die state that is just completely cracked. So there's always stuff to look for in those. So I would definitely recommend Liberty Seated Collectors Club for some more information on those guys for sure.
Great. Are there common Liberty Seated counterfeits to watch out for?
Yeah. You'll find a lot of fake seated dollars. Fake seated dollars are generally, seated dollars are very often targeted as counterfeits. A lot of the times, and the worst part is that they can be the really expensive ones and they can be the really cheap ones. They will counterfeit both. So you'll see a bunch of fake 1870 CCs, but you can also, you know, find some fake 1860 O's. So yes, they are tough because they are faked and they were faked and they will continue to be faked, which is why, you know, if you're truly not a specialist, I always recommend buy certified. Or if you're not buying certified, buy from a dealer that is reputable and has a policy on returns. You know, if they won't accept that they messed up, then don't, you know, try to avoid, because even us, we get it wrong sometimes. And, you know, we own up to our mistakes when we do. And that's really important because you don't want to get stuck with that coin that, you know, the expert told you was good. So certified is first line of defense, and then finding a trusted dealer is the second. But yes, fakes exist. And you should be wary, honestly, of all Liberty Seated dollars. You really should, because they're very faked a lot. It's the same with trade dollars, a lot of fakes. Unless you've really studied and know the diagnostics, be wary.
Steve wants to tell you great presentation and thanks for your service in the armed forces.
Thanks, guys.
With that lovely comment, that's the end. I do want to let everybody know the last question was actually something I'm about to tell you, so don't think I'm ignoring you, Quentin. Our NumismaTalks are being recorded and will be available once they're edited. Give us a couple of weeks because our editing team edits a lot of different videos. And then please be sure to check our future programs on money.org under the education tab. And I just saw somebody said they wanted to see your tattoo. I'm saying it, but I'm not. You do not need to do that.
I'll be honest, I'm in long sleeves. I don't think I can pull it up all the way, but I promise you, I assure you it exists. I got it when I was 18.
Oh, wow. Well, we all believe you for sure. Thank you so much, Russ. And I hope everybody had a great viewing. This was a great presentation, and I appreciate